and we greatly appreciate your involvement in the program and in the process. As you just heard, we will be recording the webinar this evening, and a link to the recording will be provided after tonight's session, as well as a survey that we encourage all of you to please complete, as it's helpful to us as we continue our work around the LFPA Cooperative Agreement Program. Next slide, please. I'd like to also just recognize at this time our team that you'll hear presenting tonight on the webinar. As Rebecca noted, I am Ashley Randall, and I serve as our Deputy Commissioner and Director of Legislative and Policy Affairs at the department. And I'm joined by our rockstar team that helped to both develop the grant and is working to deploy the grant and implement it in the coming months. We have Carrie Corman, who is our grants manager, and she will be discussing the RFR later in this evening's session. We have Rebecca Davidson, who is our Strategic Initiatives Manager, and she will be discussing the MassGrown Exchange along with Rick LeBlanc from our Ag Markets team. And then we have David Weber from our Division of Ag Markets, who's providing support to the webinar tonight. And also, I'd just like to acknowledge that we will be having a contractor that will be assisting us with the program, Rose Arthur. She's joining us this evening as well. And we thank her for her attendance, and we're really looking forward to working with her starting in a few weeks to help deploy the program and assist with the implementation as we work through the RFR process over the next few years. Next slide, please. For an overall general goal and agenda for this evening, we'll start off by providing the purpose and goals of the LFPA program. The applications are due for this program on September 16th, and I hope you've all had an opportunity to look at the RFR. As we'll be discussing the RFR this evening and going through the process and some of the commonly answered questions that you may have. We'll also have a question and answer period, and I would encourage you all to utilize the Q&A function throughout the evening so we can capture the questions that you have. We've also posted an FAQ on the LFPA website, and throughout the evening, we will be collecting those questions, and we hope to be able to answer them throughout the evening. But if we aren't able to get to all of the questions, we will update the FAQ and respond to them on a continued basis. So please continue to check the website. And we'll also this evening be providing an overview and an exploration of our MassGrown Exchange, which was a platform that we developed in 2020 in response to the pandemic and the supply chain disruptions that may serve as a tool and a resource to participants in the LFPA program and throughout the process. So I would encourage you all after the Q&A to stay on to learn more about the MassGrown Exchange, and if time allows, we can answer some additional questions then as well. Next slide, please. In regards to the purpose of the LFPA program, the Local Food Purchase Assistance Program was meant to maintain and improve the food and agricultural supply chain resiliency through non-competitive cooperative agreements with state and federally recognized tribal governments. We were fortunate in Massachusetts that we were able to submit an application to USDA to maximize $7.5 million in funding. And we made sure that we were working in conjunction with all interested parties that were federally recognized tribal governments. And as none wanted to submit an application, we were able to submit one on behalf of the state and open up this opportunity to everyone. And the funding for this program was provided through the American Rescue Plan Act. Next slide, please. So the three overarching goals of the program are to provide an opportunity, as I mentioned, to state and tribal governments to strengthen local and regional food systems, The second goal is to help support local and socially disadvantaged farmers and producers by building and expanding economic opportunities. This program really builds off the Farmers to Families Food Box program and the lessons that were learned through that program, with an emphasis on supporting and working with socially disadvantaged farmers and producers to provide this opportunity to them. And then the third goal is to establish, strengthen, and broaden partnerships with producers and the food distribution community, local food networks, and nonprofits distributing fresh and nutritious foods in rural, remote, or underserved communities. And if you've had a chance to look through the RFR, you will note that our emphasis really is on collaboration and partnership building to ensure that this is a sustainable model and not just for the life of the grant, but something that can be replicated across the food system in Massachusetts. And again, with an emphasis on working with socially disadvantaged farmers, but also to make sure that food is being distributed into underserved communities. Next slide, please. So when we look at the definitions that are presented in the RFR, local or regional producers are defined as farmers, ranchers, producers, processors, or distributors, and other businesses involved in food production or distribution that are located in the state or tribal region or within 400 miles of the delivery destination. And again, this is a USDA program, so we are using the definitions that are provided by USDA. So the definition of local under the USDA criterion is within a 400-mile distance. For local or regional food, they define that as locally and regionally produced food, being food that is raised, produced, aggregated, stored, processed, and distributed in the locality or region where the final product is marketed to consumers, so that the total distance that the product travels between the farm or ranch where the product originates and the point of sale to the end consumer is at most 400 miles, or both the final market and the origin of the product are within the same state, territory, or tribal land. Next slide, please. Domestic food. So the definition, as you'll see, is an agricultural commodity, means a product that's grown, processed, or otherwise prepared for sale or distribution exclusively in the United States or its territories, except with respect to minor ingredients. Minor ingredients from non-domestic sources will be allowed to be utilized as a United States product if such ingredients are not otherwise produced in the United States and commercially available in the United States at fair and reasonable prices from domestic sources. Next slide, please. Socially disadvantaged producers. As we noted early on with the USDA program, socially disadvantaged farmer or producers are defined as a farmer or a rancher who is a member of a socially disadvantaged group. A socially disadvantaged group is a group whose members have been subject to discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, age, disability, and where applicable, sex, marital status, familial status, parental status, religion, sexual orientation, genetic information, political beliefs, reprisal, or because all or a part of an individual's income is derived from any public assistance program. I'd just like to note as well that as many of you may have responded or be aware, we are also at this time, we have a socially disadvantaged self-identification form that we've posted on our LFPA webpage. And that is an effort through the department that we are undertaking not only for the LFPA program, but also as part of our environmental justice goals and to implement into our programs so we can gain feedback and have a thoughtful, intentional approach across all of our programs and not just the LFPA. So the definition you see here is the definition that USDA provides, and that's distinguished from our self-identification form that you may have already taken, or if you would like to participate in, is on our LFPA page and we'll be sending out as well. So I just wanted to make that clarification because I know we have received a few questions on that, but this is the definition that will be used for the LFPA program and that you find within the RFR. And I'd also just like to note, I know Rebecca posted in the chat, this is a public record, and so we would discourage conversations ongoing, but this is also an opportunity to make connections with potential collaborators for the LFPA program. So if you would like to introduce yourselves and then connect offline with others, that would be a great opportunity to create those regional partnerships. So please, if you feel so inclined to provide what organization you're with or where you're from, this would help with creating those collaborative models. Next slide, please. And then, as I mentioned, the end product, we're looking to have served and distributed into underserved communities. Again, underserved communities, that the definition that is provided through USDA are those defined in accordance with Executive Order 13985, Executive Order on Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government as of January 20th, 2021. The term equity means the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals, including individuals who belong to underserved communities that have been denied such treatment, such as Black, Latino, and Indigenous and Native American persons, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. The term underserved communities refers to populations sharing a particular characteristic, as well as geographic communities that have been systemically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life, as exemplified by the list in the preceding definition of equity. So we really are looking into proposals, and Carrie, when she discusses the RFR, will go into more detail about the RFR specifics. But with an underserved community, we are trying to reach those areas across the state that have high rates of food insecurity, don't have adequate access to real, wholesome, local food, and to ensure that we are getting food distributed across the state and making sure that this program is equitable and intentional and thoughtful. So we look forward to seeing that throughout the proposals. Next slide, please. In terms of the program background and USDA goals, again, we mentioned that we've contracted with USDA. We did receive $7.5 million. And on the procurement side, the states were allocated this funding to be able to procure domestic and local foods and provide the opportunity to local farmers, ranchers, producers, and food system members. The targeted purchases from socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers are the goal to expand existing local food networks and possibly create new models that are effective in addressing food insecurity and providing greater opportunities within the food system. And then the documented procurement procedures must be in place and consistent with applicable state, local, and tribal laws and regulations. And then on the distribution side, again, we mentioned that we'll distribute the food within the state and the region. We do know that other states are also undertaking this effort in the New England region, but really our focus is on Massachusetts and working with our producers and our food system members here. And then again, just distribution to communities not normally served through traditional food distribution networks is strongly encouraged. Next slide, please. In terms of the overall program funding, USDA allocated $400 million for the 50 states, US territories, and federally recognized tribal governments to apply to the program. Initially, we had applied for the $4.5 million that was available, and then we were informed that we were able to access the full $7.5 million. So we were very fortunate and grateful for that opportunity. Our period of performance, it is a 2-year contract. So our contract runs from June of 2022 to May 31st of 2024. So it does give some flexibility and some opportunities to anticipate for the next growing season, as I know that we're late into the season this year. So that is an opportunity to be able to plan ahead for the next growing season. And hopefully better weather will be on all of our growers and producers' sides looking ahead. Next slide, please. I will now turn it over to our grants manager, Carrie Corman, who will go over the RFR process and dive into some of the concerns and questions that we've received. Carrie?
Thanks, Ashley. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our LFPA webinar. It's so nice to see you all here, and I'm excited to talk to you a little bit more about the RFR and the application process. For those who do not know me, I'm Carrie Cornman. I'm a grants manager here at MDAR, and I run the Specialty Crop Block Grant Program, Organic Cost Share Reimbursement Program, and assist with a lot of our state and federal grant programs across all of the divisions here at MDAR. So RFR means request for response. David is going to, or may already have, dropped the link to the RFR in the chat. This is the document that includes all of the relevant information for the LFPA program and the application process, including submission instructions. I will walk you through the main components of the RFR over the next slides, and then we will have a brief Q&A session regarding the RFR. If you have any questions during these slides, please feel free to use the Q&A function, as some of you already are, as we go through, and we will answer your questions once I finish discussing the RFR portion. Just a reminder, after this RFR section and RFR Q&A, Rick LeBlanc will be discussing the MassGrown Exchange platform, so make sure you stick around to learn about that and see how that platform can help you out. So as Ashley mentioned, the deadline to respond is September 16th, 2022 by 2:00 p.m. on Friday. You will submit the proposals by email to the LFPA grant@mass.gov email. You can also submit questions to that same email until September 2nd by the end of that day. Next slide. Eligible applicants. Applicant eligibility is pretty flexible with the LFPA program. An applicant should just be a part of the local food production and distribution system. You can read and see examples of eligible applicants, including but not limited to agricultural, farming, or seafood production, processing or distribution, emergency food distribution networks, community or food organizations, school or meal programming, and organizations that provide assistance such as business planning, technical assistance, and IT services. You just need to be a legally recognized entity within the Commonwealth and be able to enter a legally binding agreement with the Commonwealth. Applicants are limited to a single proposal. To expand on this a little, we've seen a common question from organizations about receiving funding across multiple proposals. For example, let's say organization A is submitting a proposal, but organization B is planning to submit a separate proposal that includes a subcontract to organization A. This is unallowable according to USDA rules for the LFPA program. An organization cannot receive funds through multiple awards and/or contracts with this specific program. We do really highly encourage proposals that show a high level of partnership and collaboration with community members, farmers, organizations, etc., across your region of Massachusetts. Next slide, please. Eligible project areas. So this is a list that is definitely not all inclusive. We just provided a couple examples of project areas that would be acceptable for this LFPA program. One thing MDAR recognizes and is super proud of the agricultural community within Massachusetts is the high level of innovation, motivation, and execution of programs that really help communities at the local and regional level. So we're really excited to see what ideas organizations may present to us through this application process and program. All this to say, please don't feel limited to this list. But eligible project areas include food box delivery programs, distribution through nonprofit orgs, schools, or other food distribution groups, choice-based benefit delivery, and distribution of meals. As Ashley mentioned before, you just want to make sure your proposal focuses on the purchase or distribution of local food as defined in the the RFR. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we're really looking for proposals that are realistic and beneficial to their region and communities, with an emphasis on helping specifically underserved communities. This does not mean that 100% of your project must benefit socially disadvantaged communities, but it certainly should be a main focus of your proposal. Next slide, please. This slide will cover ineligible project areas. Here we have some disqualifying examples of proposals. A lot of this is USDA regulation, but really makes sense with the goal of the overall program. So projects cannot require participants to sign up for something or have conditions for participation. For example, if you have something like a CSA program, you can't enforce a sign up that requires conditions for eligibility to receive the CSA, but you could collect a list of those interested in the program for planning, participation, and outreach purposes, as long as there is a fair and equitable outreach process to all community members for that program. Proposals that do not include 51% or more of their budget spending on food purchases are not eligible. This is a requirement by USDA that projects must have a quote unquote predominance of spending on local food purchases. MDAR landed on 51% to allow applicants flexibility in their proposals and budgets. Proposals that do not include local or regional food as defined in the RFR and as Ashley mentioned earlier are also unallowable. And finally, proposals that don't meet the main goals of the program as outlined in the RFR, such as local food purchasing and distribution with a focus on assisting socially disadvantaged farmers or producers and or underserved communities, will not be considered for funding. Next slide, please. Can everybody hear me okay? I did see a comment. Okay.
Yeah, there was one comment and I'm working with the participant to see if we can address that, but thank you, Carrie.
Okay. Just let me know if anybody's having trouble. Okay, requirements. These are mandatory requirements for your project and proposal. So purchases and distribution of food must occur within the program dates of December 1, 2022 through May 31st, 2024. We've had a couple of questions regarding the program dates. Proposals do not have to be active during that entire performance period. Proposals can explain their timeline within their application as long as it falls within those stated dates. What evaluators will be looking for is a realistic and manageable timeline that addresses the goals of the proposal. To expand on Massachusetts grown food and local food requirements, a majority of farm products purchased must be Massachusetts grown. The remaining products may be sourced from up to 400 miles from the point of distribution per the USDA definition of local. Projects that include a higher percentage of Massachusetts grown and produced foods will be prioritized during the evaluation period. Purchases are not limited to fresh produce. Any food or beverage product that meets the definition for domestic and local, as defined in the RFR, are permissible. This includes processed products and seafood. Food can be purchased and used in meals that are distributed through the LFPA program. However, all meal components must meet the definitions for domestic and local. Minor ingredients such as spices, oils, sweeteners, etc., used in meal preparation must meet the definition of domestic food, and meal preparation must also be performed locally. Ashley did go through these definitions earlier, but you can also find them on pages 4 and 5 of the RFR. Multiple vendor projects. Again, we really stress the collaborative efforts of partners across a region for this project. And a focus must be on a distribution to underserved communities. Next slide, please. Awarding priorities. I know I must sound like a parrot repeating all of these goals and priorities, but what I want to touch on here are the factors that evaluators will give priority scoring to on proposals during the evaluation project period. So the higher the number of producers and total percentage of procurement funds that will be allocated to socially disadvantaged producers, the greater the consideration will be for the project. Priority will also be given to projects that show regional partnership and collaboration, as well as regional impact to ensure geographic and demographic inclusion. However, there needs to be one primary applicant who will hold the agreement as a project lead or fiduciary agent with MDAR. This lead entity shall be responsible for project administration and reporting. And when I mentioned regional collaboration, the regions of Massachusetts include Southeastern Massachusetts or the Capes and Islands, Greater Boston, Northeastern Massachusetts, Central Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, and the Berkshires. Next slide, please. So we have a big range of suggested dollar values for projects, as you can see. This is to allow flexibility for smaller organizations to focus on more hyper-regional projects and to make sure we're being inclusive of all potential applicants. I also want to highlight that it is a suggested dollar amount. Applicants are not restricted to these suggested minimums and maximum amounts. We will be providing a mix of an advance and reimbursable payment schedule with 40% of funds to be provided upfront upon contract execution. We received a ton of feedback during our initial listening session that really pushed for this option. So I'm super excited that we can offer this payment schedule. Once all proper documentation is provided for the first 40% of funding, the next advance payment of an additional 40% will be provided, with the remaining 20% to be administered as reimbursable or after funds are expended to ensure proper documentation submission and closeout of expenses. You will need to make sure that you are on top of tracking expenses and proof of expenses, as submitting incomplete reporting could preclude you from future MDAR grants. There is also a quarterly financial and data tracking reporting requirement for this program. I will touch on the data reporting in a later slide. Next slide, please. So we definitely know that 51% or more of purchases need to be on food purchases. What can other requested funding expenses be? I'm going to discuss some allowable and unallowable expenses on the next couple of slides. So in addition to food purchases, applicants may request from the following cost categories: salary, fringe rates, supplies, equipment, though there's a bit of a caveat with equipment that I will touch on, contractual costs, indirect costs, and miscellaneous costs that we call other costs. If you have questions about allowable or unallowable expenses and what category they may fall under, make sure you ask in the Q&A or send an email to that LFPA grant@mass.gov email, but I'll try to capture as much as possible in these slides. Indirect costs are capped at 10% of total funds that can be requested. Next slide, please. Unallowable expenses. Here's a pretty comprehensive list of the unallowable expenses. These are all included in the RFR on pages 8 and 9. I'll give you a minute to read through these, but some big ones we've had questions about are general purpose equipment purchased to own, land acquisition, loans, food storage and infrastructure, so construction costs, vehicles, though vehicle modifications for distribution are allowed, and certification or training costs, as well as seed or crop insurance. I want to note that all states, including Massachusetts, must follow USDA Agricultural Marketing Services, or AMS, terms and regulations for allowable and unallowable expenses. So these restrictions are determined at the federal level, and it's important that we stick to them. Next slide, please. Equipment. So equipment is defined as items costing $5,000 or more. So if you have an item that costs $4,999.99 or less per unit, that is considered a supply and would go under the supplies category within your budget. General purpose equipment or lease agreements to own are unallowable. However, rules do allow for rental costs of general purpose equipment for the life of the project with prior written approval. The rental agreement must terminate at the end of the performance period. Rental costs must be in accordance with local market conditions. Next slide, please. Reporting. As I mentioned earlier, there will be quarterly reporting, both financial and with data tracking. USDA is looking to capture the number of producers sourced from, including business name, product type, for example, produce, seafood, meat. That can be general categories, quantity, price, and if the producer self-identifies as socially disadvantaged. Awardees will also be expected to track the number of distributions and number of individuals served. We will also ask awardees to track the number of partnerships that existed at the start of the project and the number that were additionally developed as a result of the grant project and funding. MDAR will be providing a reporting template for this data tracking, and I promise it's not as scary as it may sound. We will also be providing resources and help with this reporting. I don't want to get too into the weeds with it as it relates to actual award period, but we just want applicants to be aware that there is an expected level of quarterly data tracking required by USDA. Next slide, please. So actual application submission. The instructions for application submission begin on page 10 of the RFR, and the RFR includes a very comprehensive list and description of exactly what's expected in an applicant's proposal. Applicants will submit their proposal with a cover page, a table of contents, executive summary, a narrative section, a budget and narrative for the budget, personnel qualifications, and letters of support or intent. The meat of the application is the narrative portion, which we're going to touch on now. The narrative should not be more than 20 pages, single space, size 11 font. Within the narrative portion, applicants must touch on 4 areas: project description, project details, work plan and timeline, and collaboration. Next slide, please. To break those 4 sections down a little bit, I'm just going to touch on them pretty quickly. The project description. This project description must explain how your project will meet the purpose of the LFPA program. This includes how the project will strengthen the local and regional food system, help to support local and socially disadvantaged farmers and or producers, and establish or broaden partnerships within the food distribution community. This includes listing any goals, objectives, and measures to evaluate project performance, and a list of the areas affected by the project. Next slide, please. The second section within the project narrative is project details, and this is a really heavily weighted section, so you'll want to make sure that you go through the RFR and really look through those instructions. The project details goes into detail on the RFR on page 11. And it's a lot of text, so I didn't want to bog down the slides with all of it, but essentially there are 5 areas applications should touch on within this section, which are farmer producer engagement, community engagement, benefit distribution, food distribution, and areas impacted. Essentially, applicants should provide project details that expand upon the project goals or objectives they listed in the project description to address these 5 category areas. We included quite a few items under each category to consider within your proposal. Make sure you take a look and carefully read through this section. I also want to emphasize that with this section, that some considerations may not be relevant to each applicant's project. So we don't expect you to touch every single one of them. Applicants may include and expand upon additional project details that aren't listed in that section as well. Next slide, please. So the next section is the work plan and timeline. This is still within the project narrative. Applicants must provide a work plan that describes the activities and timeline associated with each project goal or objective. The section should include how and where the activities will take place, required resources needed, milestones for assessing progress and success, and the person or persons responsible for completing the activities. Next slide, please. The next section is collaboration. For this section, make sure you provide your qualifications to perform the work associated with your project. We also want to see your plan for managing the project, as well as collaborating with project stakeholder groups. Describe how the project, as well as the relationships established, will be sustained beyond the project's period of performance. Next slide, please. Budget and budget narrative. We touched on some allowable and unallowable expenses earlier. This is just kind of getting into the structure of the budget. Applicants should provide a full budget, and the budget must show the relevant expenditure categories in a far left column. And proceeding across the page, there must be a column showing the dollar amount of the LFPA funds requested. A accompanying budget narrative should prove justification for each budget category and how the amounts were derived for the budget. The budget and budget narrative do not count towards that 20-page project narrative limit. Next slide. And then some additional requirements for the application submission are personnel qualifications. Just provide some resumes of the relevant experience and qualifications of lead personnel for the project, and as well as letters of support and or intent. Please provide letters of support or intent from community and organizational partners that you will work with to distribute the food if applicable. This will just help us to see that level of regional collaboration we're looking for. Next slide. Evaluation criteria. So this is the breakdown of the project evaluation criteria scoring that will be utilized by evaluators. The evaluation will be weighted heavily on project explanation, excuse me, on project explanation and the grant project narrative, as well as the awarding priorities that were touched on earlier. MDAR will conduct an administrative review, and applications will be evaluated by an MDAR panel representing multiple facets of the food supply chain. Please excuse me, I have to drink some water, sorry.
While Carrie's taking a sip of water, I just wanted to let everyone know that feel free to use the Q&A, and we'll be taking some of those questions that haven't been yet answered in the Q&A portion, as well as feel free to continue using the chat if that's a more accessible format for you. Thanks. Good to go, Carrie?
Thanks, Rebecca. Sorry, I apologize. I'm getting over a cough. And I know I've been talking for a long time. I'm almost done. So with the evaluation criteria breakdown, it begins on page 12 of the RFR, and I highly encourage applicants to thoroughly review that section of the RFR. Next slide. Excuse me. So on this slide, we have some helpful resources for applicants as they work on their proposal. We will include links to these in the chat. That includes our Environmental Justice Map Viewer, our Massachusetts SNAP Gap Map, and our Massachusetts Food System Map. These are all really great resources you can use while developing your proposal to refer to poverty level lines or just to get a better sense of your region. I appreciate your time. I promise I'm done blabbing now, but please feel free to use the Q&A. If you go to the next slide, we will touch on a question and answer period. If someone wants to go ahead and take a question, I'm just going to take another sip of water.
Yeah, take your time, Carrie, and thank you so much for going over that. And I see we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A right now, and I also see a few in the chat. So I'm just going to go through these and have our MDAR team tackle the ones that we can tackle live, and then we will be recording these and making sure that they enter into our FAQ that is posted on the mass.gov LFPA webpage. So if we don't get to your question today, rest assured it will be included in the FAQ. So I'm just going to start at the top here. And can purchases of food and farm products include CSA shares? And I'm going to lump this question together with another question that we received down the line here that had to do with how do you have a program where you have to have some form of sign up or some information from the participant when considering this prohibition on requiring food recipients to sign up. So I think if our team could touch on those two things, that would be great. And I'm happy to take part of this question, or Carrie, you can kick us off if you like.
Sure, thanks, Rebecca. And I'm looking through the questions. There's a ton of really great questions. So for purchases of food, can they be CSA shares? Yes, that is allowable as long as, like we mentioned, there are no conditions for eligibility for community members to receive or apply for those CSA shares. The second question regarding signups and conditions, what you can do is kind of create a like you can collect interest for a program. So you can collect names and whatnot for planning or outreach or participation kind of research. What you mainly want to avoid is just requiring conditions for community members to receive the product that you are trying to share. I hope that answers the question.
I think that's great. Thank you, Carrie. I'm just going to mark this as answered as in live session. And I just wanted to add as well that your outreach piece is really going to feed into that as well. So making sure that the outreach that you're doing is fair and equitable, and that you show in your proposal how you would be doing that outreach and engaging with the community. Okay. So going back to the top here, given that local is 400-mile radius, what prevents out-of-state producers and farmers from taking advantage of this opportunity?
That's another question I can take, and that's a great question. So as the RFR states, a majority of food that is purchased or distributed must be Massachusetts grown. And how we're trying to address this, preventing out-of-state producers and farmers from taking advantage of this Massachusetts related grant, is by putting a greater emphasis and priority on scoring projects that do demonstrate that Massachusetts grown local food will be purchased and distributed.
Thank you, Carrie. And then another question here, and this was a question that was answered, a typed answer, but I just wanted to keep it in here because it was asked several times. Are producers who are subject to discrimination on any of these bases, including those listed after where applicable, equal priorities for funding in Massachusetts? And I just wanted to call attention to Ashley's comment in the beginning of the session, and I didn't know if you wanted to expand on that, Ashley, or just talk through how the definition applies to the RFR.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you, Rebecca. So as I mentioned earlier, the socially disadvantaged definition is provided through USDA, and that is the definition that we are utilizing for this program. The self-identification form that is found on our website is multi-purpose. So it's not only for the LFPA program, and our definition is more broad. And again, if you have an opportunity to complete the self-identification form and feel comfortable doing so, we would encourage you to, because we'll use that information to provide for further grant programs for our environmental justice efforts, and programming at the department, as well as to make future connections and ensure that all individuals within the food space are able to access our programs and resources that we provide. So our self-identification form is more broad, I would say, than the USDA definition that has been provided. But again, as Carrie stated, we have to comply with USDA requirements, and the USDA definition of socially disadvantaged is what guided our RFR process.
Thank you, Ashley. There was another question that also came up in the chat as well as in the Q&A about the attachment A in the RFR, the commitment to socially disadvantaged producers. So I didn't know, Carrie, if you could touch on that. I don't know if that's like a separate requirement from this.
Sure, I'm just going to read the question that Karen sent. Is the SDP, which is Supplier Diversity Program commitment described in attachment A of the RFR required by this RFR? If so, can it be met by purchasing from socially disadvantaged producers, even if they are not SDO certified? Which is a great question, Karen. And you read the document thoroughly. I'm really impressed. Grant opportunities have more flexibility in the procurements that can be made with sub-awardees. So as long as we're meeting the goals of the federal regulations with this grant program, I don't think you're going to have any issues with your procurement and supplying to socially disadvantaged producers. But that's a great question.
Thank you, Carrie. Next question, may food be purchased prior to the end of the project term for distribution later in 2024 or after May 31st, 2024?
I can take that one as well. Another great question. My understanding is that all purchases and distribution must be completed by May 31st, 2024. So you wouldn't be able to engage in any more activities related to the funding or the grant project after that date.
Thanks, Carrie. We have another question here. Will MDR publish the list, names, and contact info of socially disadvantaged farmers and producers to make connecting and collaborating easier? So in the next portion of our program, we're going to touch on the MassGrown Exchange, which is really our connecting and collaborating platform. And we will not be publishing the list of socially disadvantaged farmers. What we're really encouraging folks to do is in your proposal outline how you will be making those connections with socially disadvantaged farmers. In addition, we are providing support to those socially disadvantaged farmers and producers who self-identified in our form, making sure that they are aware of the program, of the MassGrown Exchange and how to register, and also so that they are aware of who the awardees are once that is made announced so that they can collaborate in the program. Okay. This is another similar question. By seafood production, does that include fisheries? I'm going to say
so. As long as it's local food within Massachusetts.
Which budget category should we use for food and farm product purchases, supplies, contracts?
That's a great question, and I can take that one. I think the answer is it may depend. If you're working with different organizations to kind of subcontract out and purchase food from, that may be under contractual. If you're doing the actual purchasing on a smaller scale, it may be supplies. I'm sorry, I don't have like a clear-cut answer, but with a question like this, feel free to reach out to the email, or my contact information is provided. You can contact me as well, and I can help you out with that. I do want to note with a question like this, if the evaluation team is reviewing a budget and maybe some items aren't in the quote unquote correct category, that's not going to count against you. We understand that developing budgets is a little difficult. What's more important is the justification behind the purchases.
Thank you, Carrie. Can you provide an example of special purpose equipment?
Sure. So special purpose equipment, which is separate from general purpose equipment, is equipment that is specific to like research or very like scientific related proposals as defined by USDA. I would argue that there is a lot of special purpose equipment within the agricultural field. And if you believe that you are dealing with special purpose equipment, you can reach out to us and I can check. We have to get special approval from USDA, and there are conditions for special purpose equipment that include that equipment must be used like for the goals of what the grant were in perpetuity. So you couldn't purchase equipment that you use for this grant, and then after the life of the grant, you use it for whatever you want or to make a profit off of it. There's very specific conditions with it. It gets a little confusing. I've been dealing with these grants for years and I'm still confused over it. But if you have examples that you may want to ask me about, please feel free and we can kind of work through that.
Thank you, Carrie. And can you provide a definition of food instrument, please? I can take this one. One example that I'm very closely involved with is the Farmers Market Nutrition Program coupons. So for example, something that is not food directly, but indirectly allows you to procure food would be a food instrument. And that's what's unallowable through this grant program. So the food has to be direct to the participant in the program. It can't be through a food instrument like a coupon or a voucher or a ticket. Can a farmer or producer supply their local foods to more than one grant awardee, or can they only supply one organization that may receive the award? And I think you answered this earlier, Carrie, but if you could just touch on it briefly again, that would be great.
I'd love to, and great question, Deanna. Farmers or producers can supply their foods to more than one grant awardee. The only thing we want to worry about is the actual contracts with the subawardees. They can't receive funds through multiple applicants. So the farmers or producers that multiple applicants may be dealing with, they can supply their local foods through different awardees.
Thank you. In the project details section, a couple prompts explicitly state that they should be addressed only if applicable, but most do not. For the rest, is it still expected that only some will be applicable for any given applicant?
Yeah, I think so. With the project details section, which if you see in the RFR is pretty comprehensive, like I said, touch on the ones that you feel your project most closely relates to. And like I said, there may be some considerations that MDAR didn't consider when creating the RFR. So just make sure, I want to avoid an applicant hitting every single item. That may not be realistic. So I think what applicants should try to focus on is hitting all of the considerations that are realistic for their project and proposal.
Thank you. Next question, will a budget template be provided?
We do not have a budget template per se. Organizations do theirs differently. We've done different templates across different grants, but with the wide variety of sizes of projects we're expecting, we wanted to allow more flexibility with the budget template. But my suggestion would be to break down the cost categories on the left side of like an Excel sheet, left side. And then going across, break down those costs. So just make sure you're hitting, food purchases, and then your salary, fringe rates, supplies, equipment, contractual, indirect, and other.
Thank you, Carrie. A question about regional partnerships, if they could include Central Mass Farms with Western Mass CBOs.
does anybody know what CBO stands for? I apologize, but
Yeah.
I do think it would be, I don't think we're restricting regional collaborations to only those regions. If there's some cross-regional collaboration, I think community-based organizations, thank you. I think there's no issue with cross collaboration across regions.
Great, thank you. Good question. How do farms operated by nonprofits determine socially disadvantaged status? So that's a good question, Maxwell. I don't know if any of our panelists have a thought on that, but we can always get back to you as well on that specific question. And it will be posted on our FAQ. I believe we addressed Constance's question. So I think this question as well about applying across the board for producers, any one producer can serve multiple suppliers. We addressed that earlier. If an organization is a producer and distributor, can any part of the 51% of food purchased be used to be purchased directly from the organization that is applying as well as from other producers?
That's a great question. I think I would have to check with USDA on that one and get back to you. I see Lydia asked that question. So I think I don't know the answer to that one right off the bat, but it's a great question.
And I know that we're running out of time on this section, so I just want to appreciate all the questions that have come in, and also reiterate that while we are going to move on to our next section on the MassGrown Exchange, if there is time at the end of the session, we'll continue to address these questions in the order that they came in. And if we're not able to address all of them, they will be posted to our FAQ. So I want to thank everyone who's put a question in. They've been really good questions that I think reflect what a lot of people have been thinking. So don't hesitate to continue to put those in. But we are going to move to the next section of our presentation here. I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Rick LeBlanc, who's going to give us an overview of the MassGrown Exchange. And we're going to do a switching of the screen shares, so just bear with us for a second while we sort that out.
Rebecca, can everybody hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I'm asking to share my screen.
Okay.
It's saying host disabled, participant screen shaving.
Okay, let me just take a look here. Okay, try now, Rick. I think I fixed that.
You did, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
MassGrown Exchange. Welcome everyone. We thought this might be a little tricky, but I think it might be more valuable to look at this MassGrown Exchange in a live setting. Just a couple of notes regarding it is we started the MassGrown Exchange in the midst of COVID in response to a lot of supply chain interruptions and buyers and sellers looking for new connections. And so we established this as a simple opportunity for businesses to connect. This is a business-to-business platform. We now have over 400 businesses that have registered on here. So we saw this as a possible tool for this project, and in its very different ways that it can be used. There are three main ways to use the platform. One is I'm going to show you these top tabs here, products, businesses. These are the top mostly used tabs. And one way people use this is to look at listings. They just come to the website and look at what's posted. A second way to use this is to register and create alerts for yourself. So when someone else posts something, you'll be alerted for these fresh posts and listings. But when you do just create alerts for yourself as kind of a business card and create these alerts, you don't show up under the tab of businesses. So, and that's sometimes people don't want to show who they are. They're just interested in viewing products and services that are listed. So that option is provided on this site. And again, the third way to use this is to register and then create a listing for yourself. So this platform can be used in multiple ways, and we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. But it's exciting to be able to see the different ways that it can be used. Bear with me for a second. All right. So I wanted to show also the map on the platform for those that have listed items. So if you're looking to work with people regionally, you can look at the map this way and click on and get different business information. So this is an option for folks. But I also wanted to quickly show you the MassGrown map. Is if you're looking to outreach to businesses through the retail map, this list is very flexible. And I know I'm going to go back to the exchange in a second, but I just want to let people know that if they create a query, you can export a list in the MassGrown map. We don't have that opportunity right now on the exchange, but we will be looking to develop that in the future. But you can export a specific query of farmers in this platform on the MassGrown map. And maybe David's putting the links for these in the chat as we discuss this. So going back to the MassGrown platform, again, this is a business-to-business platform. It's a simple way to connect. And I'm going to take a minute just to show you what it looks like on my account. So I have a profile that I created just to be able to see what's going on here as people list products and services. So I just have a MassGrown base account. I just wanted to show you this. When you register your account, it's pretty simple. Again, if anybody had any questions, there's no fee involved or any of this. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes. You would just create your basic information of who you are, a contact, phone, what website. And this is the creative expandable part of the business description. And then types of businesses or farms or fisheries that you might be interested in being alerted for. So when you create your business listing in here, you can check off one or all of them, depending on what you're looking for. Be aware if you check all of these off, every time someone lists something on the MassGrown Exchange, you will get an automatic email. And I just wanted to show you what that quickly looks like. So this is a listing that just came in yesterday or today, actually, from Walden Woods. They're looking for seasonal farm help. So again, this platform is not just for LFPA, it's for a range of exchanges of job postings, farms selling product, and so forth. But this is what the automatic email gets sent out to folks that checked off vegetables or job postings. So I just wanted to quickly show you the automatic email that you will get based on these categories that you check off. So again, that's pretty much all you have to know with creating your business profile. The second step in being showcased as a product or service is creating a listing. And so right now, I don't have any listings because that's not my intent by my registering of the MassGrown. But when you come in here and you add a listing, this is where you can be a little creative with the options. We also wanted to make sure that you know that you can create multiple listings. We didn't want to set this up as just a buyer seller categories, but you might have different needs. You might be looking to sell something, but also looking to purchase something, or you might be just looking for something in general. And this is where we wanted to let folks know that if you're looking for growers of specific types, you can create a listing as an organization and say looking for, and then be very specific in the detail section here. There is a start date and an end date, so it is date sensitive, but you can create again categories in here. But again, if you're looking for something, you're donating something, a job posting, providing a service, again for organizations, if you're providing a service, you can list yourself in here. Again, it's a two-step process. You create your registration and then create your listing. So then once you create your listing, a listing is then depicted immediately on this MassGrown Exchange. And so these are dated by the most recent. So once you make a posting, and we have Stargazer Hollow Farm has checked off the category for sale for CSAs. The next also for sale for duck eggs, or so as you see there's a range of uses that are being used. This business has warehouse space and is looking for folks to submit ideas for them. When you do click on details, I'll just click on this one, for example, for Red Fire. This is what he's offering specifically. And I just wanted to show you this. These are, we have a lot of fields, but well, not too many actually. We wanted to keep it simple. They're not all required. So you can be general with your descriptions, or you can be very specific. Again, going back to products and services, there are all these different ranges that you can do and register. Let's see. I think that's most of what I wanted to make sure. I just want to make sure that if you're registering, we didn't want it to just be business cards and organization cards, but under the businesses, you will only show up on the exchange if you create a listing to go along with it. So with each one of these postings, you'll see in the details someone creating, and again here looking for a seasonal manager for the Springfield food policy, for example. And again, on the right-hand side is information, a contact, and a website, and directions if you wanted to see and learn more from Liz, specifically in this contact. So as you see here, we have 103 businesses live on here that have created listings. There are more businesses that haven't created listings that are getting alerted when you do list something of interest. So be aware of that. Again, if you're an organization and you want to be listed, make sure you create your registration, but also create a listing. And I think that's most of what I wanted to cover. And I wanted to make sure we have more time for questions as well. But if anybody has any challenges with registering, I'm happy to help folks with this. Again, it only takes about 5 to 10 minutes, but you're going to basically create your own account and your own password. So it's very self-service on this platform. There's no direct sales and no direct emails going on here other than the information and gathering that you can get for the service. The LFP team, anything I missed that I need to share, or come back and we can just take questions?
I think that's great, Rick. Thank you so much for that overview of the MassGrown Exchange. I'm just gonna take a quick pause, see if there are any MassGrown Exchange related questions that pop up in the Q&A. And then we're gonna take the additional time that we have here to continue down the list of Q&A that we have. Okay. So I'm going to go back to our slide deck. So give me one moment. So you should just see the slides. If the panelists could give me a thumbs up if that's the case.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we're going to go back to where we were in the order of the questions, and then we will close up a little bit before 7:30. Okay. So I'm going to pick up at a question related to CSAs. Usually requires some form of payment before receiving the boxes. Are you suggesting that prepayment is not possible? And I would say yes, but mainly because the food needs to be provided free of charge to all recipients of the food in the LFPA program.
Oh, I will add though, we do have advance payments for the awardees. So if you put in your budget a portion of covering those CSA costs, you would receive advance payment to be able to then distribute those CSAs to community members.
That's a great point. Thank you, Carrie. Another question, are food producers who are also their own distributors allowed to apply? And if they are production expansions allowed?
I think we had a similar question, and that's one I want to check in with USDA about. Production expansions, anything that's like construction or infrastructure related is unfortunately not allowed. And that is a USDA AMS rule and regulation, unfortunately.
So there's the question goes into a little more detail, and we'll just take that question offline if that's okay, just to in the effort of moving through these. A clarifying question about sign-up prohibition. If outreach is fair and equitable and there are no conditions to participate, is it allowable to have participants register and collect info like address, phone, etc., for purposes of communication and possible delivery?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah, that might be something that we just want to check as far as the details of collecting that information from participants. Just we'll double check on that, and then we'll make sure that that response is posted in the FAQ. Is it required for the applicant to identify the specific farmers that will supply the products in the proposal, or can farmer producer recruitment be a part of the process? I think this is a great question. And I think it's, we speak to this in the project description section of the RFR under farmer and community engagement. But if others on our MDR team want to chime in further on that, feel free.
Sure, I can touch on that. That is a really great question. It is, I would say it's not required to have the specific farmers very clearly identified in the application, though it doesn't hurt at all if you already have this community of farmers that you know you can work with and list them. And if they can provide a letter of recommendation and saying like, we're willing to work with this organization or applicant, that would look really great. But you can also explain your process for farmer or producer recruitment. I think either of those avenues are great as long as you're explaining your process within your application.
Thank you, Carrie. Another question related to multiple entities. What if collaborators are purchasing local food from a food hub? Can the food hub be written into multiple applications to source food directly from farmers? Makes it easier for entities to work with a food hub than directly with multiple smaller farmers.
If the food hub itself is submitting an application, we wouldn't want to see other proposals giving money to that same food hub. We would encourage regional partnership for that food hub.
Great, thank you. Okay, this is a very related question. the nuance is that it's a food hub that works with many farms. And as a potential sub-awardee, we may be asked supply several awardees outside of our contract with one awardee. So I think this is kind of the corollary where if the food hub is solely providing food to multiple different awardees, that might be different. But here, if you want to take that.
Potential subawardee. Let me think of it on it just a minute.
Sure. And some of these, when we get into really kind of detailed questions like this, might just be easier for our team to reflect on it and post a response in the FAQ.
I think maybe if I could have, I think I'm a little confused, but as a potential subawardee, we may be asked by to supply several awardees outside of our contract with one awardee. I think that sentence is confusing me a little bit. Essentially, if you are a subawardee, you're submitting a proposal, you're asking for money. If other organizations are submitting proposals asking to subcontract out with that first subawardee, that's unallowable. But if you are not submitting a proposal and you're an organization that is receiving the funds, you, and you're an organization that is receiving the food or the distributed food, you can work with multiple awarded entities. I hope that answers the question. I know we can definitely follow up to make sure that we fully answer your question though, because I want to make sure you have all of the information.
Thank you, Carrie. According to USDA's definition of socially disadvantaged, are you able to expand at all on how to judge if and when the following categories would be considered applicable? Sex, marital status, familial status, parental status, religion, sexual orientation, genetic information, political beliefs, reprisal, or because all or part of an individual's income is derived from any public assistance program. So I know this is something that we're seeking clarity from USDA on. And if we receive any clarity that changes anything that we've provided today, we will certainly communicate that out. Does anybody want to add anything from our MDAR team on that point?
Sure, I will just add that in your application, if you find that as an applicant, you meet any of those areas described in that definition, then you do fall under that definition and you can present that in your application. We won't judge or put any sort of like scale or weight on one status compared to another.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay, I think the last actual question that we have on here is what's stopping someone from making a claim in the application and then not actually working with the farms once they get it? So there are reporting requirements, but yeah, Carrie, if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think we have a number of avenues to kind of work through that. So as Rebecca just mentioned, there are reporting requirements, including financial, and all documentation and expenses has to be provided to MDAR, or we will not follow through with any of the additional payments or advance payments or reimbursable payments. As Ashley mentioned, we also have a wonderful contractor that is coming on board with us who will be working with our awardees to make sure that these relationships are staying on track, and also to provide help and resources and whatnot. So we'll have someone on the MDAR team that's working with our sub-awardees to make sure that they're staying on track with their proposal that they provided.
The other thing that I just wanted to mention, I think that's great, Carrie. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is that we'll be looking in the applications for those that mention long-term sustainability of these partnerships. That's one of the exciting things about the LFPA program, is that they recognize the value of sustaining these relationships between socially disadvantaged producers and farmers and underserved communities beyond the life of the grant. So that's something that we're going to be looking towards as well. So I think that is the last question that I see in the Q&A that we had yet to respond. There's another question that came in just in the chat. Now, could you please describe the supplier diversity requirement? Seems to be 25% of the evaluation points. Is this right? So that might just be a quick clarification on your end, Carrie. That's okay.
Definitely. So that is for procurements of goods and services for divisions under EEA. This is more related to grants. So grants have a lot more flexibility with their evaluation and how they evaluate proposals they receive. So it's kind of different. There's the world of grants and there's the world of purchasing goods and services. The attachment A is like standard boilerplate information we have to include for each RFR, but just know that that's more related to government purchases of like actual goods and services. It's a little bit different for grants, but that's a great question.
Thank you, Carrie. And I'm just going to check the Q&A one more time here. Can we read all the comments in the Q&A? Yes, we're going to be copy pasting all of the questions that came in through the Q&A into our FAQ page, and also reiterating the answers that we provided live into that Q&A so that folks who may have missed the webinar or want to review responses can do so.
I see one more question in the chat from Liz.
Oh, okay.
Does my answer mean that someone could come up with a unique definition and they would be considered disadvantaged with the same weight as a farmer with a physical disability or one who is BIPOC? Good question. I'm happy to provide clarification. We're using the USDA definition of underserved and socially disadvantaged. So within that definition, if you meet any of those kind of like conditions under that definition of socially disadvantaged, you are considered socially disadvantaged, and you can put that in your application. And what I meant by we're not going to put a different weight on any kind of status is the conditions listed within that definition. We're not going to put weight on one versus the other. We wouldn't be allowed to do that. That's more what I meant. So I hope I answered your question with some more clarification, but just let me know.
Great, thank you, Carrie. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So thank you to my fellow panelists. I'm just going to get to our closeout slide here. Apologies, going through these Exchange slides. So our contact information is on the screen, should anyone want to follow up specifically. And we recommend using the LFPA grant at mass.gov for any questions that you have. We'll be posting a follow-up survey in the chat, and we do encourage you to complete that. I'll put that in the chat right now. And please take some time to complete that. You can also request one-on-one support to register on the MassGrown Exchange if that's something that you would like to request, and provide any additional comments or questions in that form as well. You can submit questions regarding the LFPA program until Friday, September 2nd at 4 p.m. at lfpagrant@mass.gov. And as a reminder, applications must be received by 2 p.m. on Friday, September 16th, and late submissions will not be considered. You may submit proposals via email to lfpagrant@mass.gov. And I'm going to pass it back to Ashley Randall to provide our closing words.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I'd like to thank our MDAR team that supported the webinar this evening. They have been wonderful colleagues to work on this program. And as we mentioned, we really are looking to make this an intentional, impactful, and equitable program. I always say that we have the privilege to work with farmers and members of the food system. And again, this is a privilege for us to be able to deploy this program and to work with everyone that's interested in participating to ensure that it really is thoughtfully carried out across the food system. And that when we're looking at the RFR applications, to ensure that it's a sustainable model and not a one-time opportunity for our food system members. So we really value all of the thoughtful questions that we received tonight, the comments in the chat that we received, and your leadership and participation in this program. So again, I'd like to thank you all. We look forward to seeing your submissions to the RFR and working with you over the next few years, hopefully, to carry out this program. Thank you all and have a great evening.